Our next speaker is a Dutch member of the European Green Party in the European Parliament and one of the party's two spitzenkandidats. Whereas the two biggest parties in the European Parliament, the EPP and the Social Democrats, seems to be suffering a decline in voter turnout ahead of the coming election, the Greens are growing in popularity. Their success is built on a very pro-European agenda focused on climate issues and democracy. Bas Eickhut is here today to offer us a new Green Deal for Europe. Please welcome him on stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Great to be here. Apologies for my very poor Danish, so I have to do it in English. I hope you don't mind. And I will talk about a new Green Deal. I have to say already in 2009, the Greens were campaigning on this issue, but then it was called a Green New Deal. So maybe for us now it's a new Green Deal, but nevertheless, what it is in core is, of course, with green policies, environmental policies putting in place, you can create jobs. And that is one of the most important issues that we have been putting central for many years already, and we do feel that the times are changing. In 2009, we may have been a bit too early. That's sometimes our problem, that we are putting some issues on the agenda a bit too early. 2009 was also a year I was in Copenhagen, but I would prefer not to be remembered by that year because it was the Copenhagen Climate Conference when I was here. And I have to say I was just passing the Bella Center again, and I got a bit of, old-time memories back, which I didn't want to be. So we were maybe a bit early, but what was also very clear was that back in those days, when we were talking about green issues, unfortunately, a lot of other crises took over since 2009, and I don't need to repeat them, but we all know them: Euro crisis, immigration/refugees, there is a difference, and of course also Brexit, which the Prime Minister talked a lot about when he was asked to look 5 years ahead, but probably we can't really predict the 5 years ahead because we don't know what the vote tomorrow will be, and that's sometimes probably a good summary of where European politics is. So we were ahead then of the game, but I do think that you see that the times are changing, that green policies, climate change policies are becoming more and more an issue also for our voters. And also I like to quote polls when they give numbers which you like, right? That's what we all do as a politician. So when you take the last Eurobarometer, which I don't always trust, to be very honest, but if you see that the issue of climate change is now the number 5 issue that people in Europe are saying is the biggest challenge for Europe. And in some countries it's even second. One of those countries is Denmark, by the way. There's only one country where climate change is even the top priority, that's Sweden, of course. You know that better than I do. But you see that the issue is gaining traction and is gaining more and more support. So then you also, when you are looking ahead, you also have to do a bit of an evaluation, certainly when there is a commissioner in the audience, to look at what has the previous commission, what have they been doing. And I think there, unfortunately, I have to be critical. Of course, there are reasons to say that we are doing a good job and can be positive about Europe, but we can't deny that there are a lot of people critical about the progress that Europe is making. And I think on climate change, it is one of those examples where you do see that Europe is making progress, but it's at the same time, it's doing it very slowly. And people want to see more from Europe. Just a couple of examples. We agreed indeed for a climate package which is putting climate change policies in place for 2030. So we know where Europe is going to be and where we are heading to. However, the targets that we are meeting in 2030 were agreed by the heads of state in October 2014, 1 year before Paris. So Europe has finally got his climate package in place for targets that we agreed before Paris. So logically, there is a demand from people to say we need to do more also now towards 2030. So there you see, we have a package in place, but it's not enough. The other example, energy. On the energy package, yes, also there you can say Europe has a package in place. We are delivering on efficiency and renewables until 2030. But also there, we do see that in those agreements that we put forward, we are taking steps back. And for renewables, one of the most important steps that we are taking back is that until 2020, we have national binding targets. So every country knows where they have to go to renewables, which is creating a very clear signal for the markets to go into a certain direction. We have given up on that as Europe. So after 2020, until 2030, we have a European target, but no binding national targets. And then, of course, some countries will deliver on renewables. You don't need to be afraid of that. And I'm here in a country where I'm pretty sure that development will continue. But there are countries in Europe taking another route. For example, in Poland, they are talking about a phase-out, not a coal phase-out, which you would love to see, but a wind phase-out. If you look at the policies that the new Polish government is putting in place, it will lead to a phase-out of wind energy in Poland. That's exactly when you are not putting national policies in place for the issues that you find important. That's always my problem also if politicians say, well, Europe should be big in big things and small in small things. The Prime Minister said it as well. But that's a very vague statement, isn't it? Sorry to be critical here. But of course, every politician agrees that we should be big in big things. The point is, we disagree on what big is and what small is, and that's a political debate. And that we should be having. There is no objective criteria that defines this is big and this is small. It's what you find important. And unfortunately, too long, for too many heads of state, issues like renewables have not been a big thing. And then, of course, you think that national governments are better entitled to do so than European policies. And there's a problem. Last point where Europe did deliver, yes, we delivered on a mobility package. So we are putting CO2 standards in place for cars. We are working on trucks. Let's hope we can get still a deal before the elections. But if you look at the levels that the Commission proposed, it was really literally listening to the demands of the German car industry. And even the Danish government said when the cars deal came out of the council, also the Danes were signing a letter to say this is not our deal. We're not very happy with that, because this is just putting us on a back burner in the development of mobility. And if you now go to China and you go to Beijing, they are seriously talking about full zero-emission mobility in 2030 in Beijing. We are fighting here in Europe over a target for 2030 on CO2 reductions of -30%, -35%. So that's the level what we are discussing here in Europe, while the rest of the world is moving on. And I think that is the core when we are talking about a new Green Deal, is that you have to be at the forefront of this policy in order to deliver the innovation and the jobs in innovation that we can have here. And if we don't, the jobs will be created outside Europe and we will be importing the technologies instead of creating it ourselves. So even if you are not a green tree hugger, even if you're not, then there are good reasons why these green policies should be put in place. And I think one of the most important ones is that we as Europe are a densely populated continent, very dependent of resources. Green Deal for their policies. And I do know that the Commission is making progress on that as well. In November 2018, they produced a communication paper that is seeing that Europe can be a zero-emission economy by 2050, and that it's delivering a net gain of 1 million jobs. So they do see the potential there, but what is lacking is policy proposals how to get there. Because with the current targets, we're not on track for that 2050 vision. So it feels sometimes a bit that they do feel the green dream for 2050, but then say, but in order to get there, we take some time. Which is a bit why, if you see the heaven on earth, then maybe we should reaching it and starting today instead of going for another discussion for 5 years. And that's probably a bit where the Greens are seen as always asking for more, never happy. But, you know, there are good reasons. We need to do so. We need to go further. And for that, it's not only about talking about green policies. We also have to broaden the agenda. And that's what we've been doing. You also have to talk about, for example, the financial flows. How to make sure that the financial flows are going in the right direction. Because if you don't get your financing right, you can talk about all kinds of policies, but the finance is still going in the wrong direction. We will have a first proof, of course, whether we can deliver on that as Europe, when we are discussing the multi-annual financial framework. This is always the multi-annual saga of Europe, which quite often in a lot of countries is only about how can we make sure we pay less to Europe. I come from the Netherlands. I know that debate very well. In Denmark, it's comparable. How to make sure we pay less to Brussels. Whereas that's, of course, a very fundamental fund that will steer how agriculture will look like and how agriculture will deal with its resources. Because if we are talking about a resource economy, then we have to look at the current agriculture practices which are still failing on us. Does that mean just get rid of all those subsidies? No. Because that will only mean further privatization, further enlargement of the agriculture sector. And that means just further reliance on fertilizer import, feeds import, a very industrial way of agriculture. I come from the Netherlands, but it's not my model. And I think there, of course, the budget should deliver. So this financial flow discussion is very important, but that's only about public money, which is a small bit. We also have to look at the private financial flows. And there, we now have some very interesting proposals on the table from the Commission on sustainable finance, which is for the first time ever in the world defining how sustainable finance should look like. So that if you as a citizen later on rely on a green bond, that it's a real green bond and not just some greenwashing, which is unfortunately still out there. But of course, when we as a parliament and Greens are working on that, we don't only want to define what we can call a green bond, because then you are creating maybe in a corner some kind of green hobbyism. We want to make that central in our economy, and then you also have to define in your finances what is non-sustainable. So not only define what is green, but also what is not green. I can tell you the financial market likes to discuss the green corner. They're a bit hesitant to talk about the other side of the coin. So let's see how far we can push that market when we are doing the discussions within the Parliament on the private financial flows. The third topic on financial flows is still, of course, also that we as Europe are still subsidizing fossil fuels. The last estimates are still giving us that the EU every year is paying around 300 million euros on fossil fuels, which is talking about more or less 600 euro per citizen we are giving to fossil fuel. This is a subsidy or a non-taxation, for example, aviation. So that brings me to the last part of my speech. I see someone getting nervous already, but you asked to talk about a Green Deal, right? It takes a time. And that is about that green policies should never be green policies only. It always should go hand in hand with social policies. I think Macron is learning that. going to be the president of the Commission, because you have to get your majority.
You did mention the budget in your speech. Do you think you will be able to agree on a budget?
Before the elections?
Right after.
Because not before the elections. No. But well, we have to, but it's going to be tough, of course. And what I hope, and maybe this is also for Denmark, because Denmark is quite often asking for a more modern budget, but at the same time, secretly in Brussels, they mainly aim for less money. That's usually, they say we want a modern budget and less, but when they go to Brussels, they only talk about less. If you do that, what will be the dynamics? It will be that then the net paying countries will get a success, they will pay less. But then, of course, the southern countries will have to claim a success, so they will keep the agriculture policies as they are. And in the east, they have to claim a success, so they will keep the cohesion policies as they are. And then, how do you square that circle? Cutting the innovation. That's how it always goes, so I really hope that some of the net-paying countries, for once, are really serious going to talk about modernization of the budget. Because otherwise it will be the same old, and we will have the same budget, and we can all criticize it again for 7 years.
Thank you, Bas Eickhut, and good luck to you and the Greens.
Thank you. Thank you.